Allow me to extend a warm welcome to all the viewers on the internet and around the world. It is sunrise on YouTube, morning on Facebook, noon on Twitter, midday on Threads, afternoon on Twitch, sunset on Instagram, and evening on Rumble. I am your host, the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme, the Phantom Menace, he who remains, and the master of the deceptive arts. We are broadcasting live directly from the sanctum of solitude and the citadel at the end of time. Good evening, everyone. I am the Ancient One, the Bachelor Supreme, the Phantom Menace, he who remains, the master of the deceptive arts, and I'm back once again to speak proudly as the voice of the vasectomites. I think it's time for you to know the truth of where we really come from. Now, it's not a simple truth, it's a difficult truth, but I think that today, of all days, is the perfect day for us to talk about the real history of the vasectomy. Today, I was thinking would be a good time for us to continue our time travel experience and travel back in time and look at who we really are by looking at our past openly, honestly, and as far as we can without too much judgment. To better understand who we really are, we need to understand where we come from. This is an ancient proverb, but there's also one that also says to know where we are going, we need to know where we have been. Now, there is an edification in an article today, and I have to make a qualifier and a disclaimer about today's article before we continue any further. The article that we are going to read today is very orderly, very concise, very organized. It's part historical, part medical interpretation of the history of the vasectomy. While it makes for great reading and a great edification, it does leave out a great many and what I would consider meaningful, informative, detailed descriptions of what really happened and what it may have been like to have lived during those times and that era that we will be traveling to. But while there are many gaps and a lot of missing information, I'm happy to come here today and fill in those gaps and fill up and cover up whatever voids there may be in information. As a medical procedure, a vasectomy is recorded to be around 202, 203 years as of 2026. But to know the real history, we have to look at, quite frankly, the true horror, the torture, the savagery, the unimaginable cruelty of what is our true past and our true history. To get a full grasp of what I'm talking about, you may need to go back tens of thousands of years, even before the early Greeks, the adventurous and conquering Mongolians, even before the ancient Chinese and the ancient Egyptians too. You need to go right back to the beginning, right back to when man and humanity started to think for itself and started to feel its own feelings and create its own reality. In those days, the language was not the common language, the common tongue that we speak today and that we use today. So there's no real way of knowing what they called the process of contraception, or in other words, what they called sterilization, right? But what they did have, or rather, what we have come to understand as contraception, is what they would have called castration. Now, a castration is something that's very different from a vasectomy. You see, when you have a vasectomy, they make an incision, right? Which is not the same thing as a full-on cut. It's really just an opening and separation of tissue in the skin. Then they cut the vas deferens, which is the cord that provides sperm, right? Separating it, seal it, and then close it up, right? And it heals and comes back together as usual. A castration, to be castrated, is described as the removal of testicles, right, from a male animal or a man, right? So this can be done in various ways, right? So today and in modern times, castration can be done chemically, and it can be done surgically, right? And it'll be done for various reasons, including health and that kind of thing. But this is a very new and modern experience, right? If you go back all the way right to the beginning, right, castrations were not done as a form of contraception, right? They were not done in terms of trying to save a life or to prolong a human life, or to even prevent further injuries, right? It was done, quite frankly, for punishment, right? Another way to define castration is, they say, the removal or deactivation of an individual's gonads, which are the gonads, right? Or a female's ovaries. Now, I'll be honest with you, to remove a female's ovaries, I think, is a little bit more modern, right? But the traditional way was to remove the infamous gonads, right? Now, these are the organs that are responsible for producing the hormones that you need for intimacy, right? And without it, you don't really have the motivation, as they say. And the men who were castrated, the men who had their gonads removed, they were called eunuchs, right? Now, this is a very modern explanation of it, right? Because they describe it as sterilization, which can be performed surgically, and it can be performed through various chemicals, right? But the traditional way was it was performed with violence and force. And to understand why castration was and is still viewed in a negative light is not just the cruel, harsh, extreme, and violent manner and the savage intention that the castrations were done with. This is of course thousands of years ago. It was also the effect that a castration had on the castrated themselves, especially when it comes to, it wasn't just a physical effect, right? It was mental suffering, emotional suffering, spiritual suffering, right? Particularly for these knee benders, because these are guys who, of course, believe that family comes first and that a happy spouse is a happy life. The dads and lads, those kind of guys. These are guys who believe that the individual grows by having a family, family grows by growing the community therefore grows by being part of society, society grows by being part of a nation, nations grow as part of humanity, and humanity thrives through the family, right? This is how they believe that they are contributing to the greater whole. Of course, they are wrong, right? So it wasn't just the vitriol that the castration had, but it was also how it affected the person. But mostly it affected them when it came to intimacy, right? Particularly the drive and the desire to become intimate. You see, by completely removing the gonads, what they do is they remove the primary source and production of testosterone, thereby drastically reducing the drive and the desire for intimacy. They remove the chemicals that create the drive for you to become intimate, right? So you don't want to do it. But for some men, this is more than just biochemical. It's instinctual, right? Intimacy is instinctual. It's something that they want within themselves. That's what I'm telling you about these benders, right? You could castrate them and they still have the desire, the instinct, down to the very fiber of their core. They want to bend that knee. And you got to let them do it too. You got to let them do it only after they bend the knee and go through the dark dimension. When they come out on the other side, they come out reborn. Bachelor 2.0, straight to the urologist, straight for a vasectomy. They don't even consider freezing their sperm because they know what's on the other side of unfreezing those sperms. So you gotta let them bend the knee for the bachelor life to thrive. There are two ways. You can just stay out of it, stay out of the dark dimension, or you can go through the dark dimension. And I find that the men who go through the dark dimension, they are the quickest to the urologist, and they are in fact the best bachelors and the best vasectomites, right? But for those who want to persevere, and for those that still have this desire, right? What happens is without those driving chemicals, you lack the strength, right, to maintain, let's call it a vertical and plump member, right? So even if the blood flows downwards, right, you cannot maintain the duration that it is required for you to have a plump vertical member. And and if you somehow overcome that difficulty, then ultimately there would be no climax for you. There would be no end result, no outcome. And very, very soon, the balloon that you worked so hard to inflate would quickly become deflated. And once deflated, I assure you it never rose again. You quickly realize that there was absolutely no point in you even entertaining the idea of being intimate. And this is part of the stigma that may still persist with concerned men when they think about becoming a vasectomite and getting a vasectomy, right? When they think about freezing their sperm and getting a vasectomy. The one of the questions that people ask, and they ask this instinctively, not even knowing the dark, long, treacherous history of where the vasectomites came from, and those who wanted to have a procedure or were forced to have a procedure to not have children. This didn't only just make you sterile, it removed the desire for intimacy altogether. And one of the things that men are concerned about is that will it affect my performance, as it did the eunuchs of the ancestral world? And of course the answer is no. No, a vasectomy doesn't do that. This is a resounding and absolute no, right? Everything stays the same with the vasectomy, right? The only thing that happens is that you are now firing blanks, right? You are now firing blanks, but you can still fire off as you have of that. I absolutely guarantee you, from a personal level, with a fair amount of experience, I have tested the vasectomy thoroughly, and I stand behind it. I absolutely stand behind it. Of course, I have no face, so take that with a grain of salt. And I am also the master of the deceptive art, so 2 grains of salt will do it for now. So you stay all the same. You stay the same. But performance and desire are just a small part of what castration was really, really for. What made castration so fear inspiring and terror inducing was not just the outcome and consequences of having desire, but no follow through and no capacity for accomplishment. It was the various sinister, devious, maniacal, and twisted ways that castration was done and performed, and also the reasons why. It was always for negative reasons. It was never done to liberate and free a person, not at all, right? Castration was used very rarely as a medical treatment, even though it has its validity and its value for caring for patients, from various types of cancer, testicular cancers, and so forth, extending life, treating various conditions. But for the most part, it was used as a form of punishment, for torture. It was used as something to insult someone with or ridicule them. It was really abuse, right? Not just physical, but mental, spiritual, emotional abuse, right? Sometimes it was done out of spite, out of hate, out of revenge and retribution, to chastise a person, right? In military times, it was used to gather information, right? So you torture the patient and he gives you whatever you want, or you threaten him with this. Or what they would do is they would demonstrate it on someone, demonstrate their capacity, their skills, the viciousness of their actions, and thereby induce everybody else to capitulate and to fall in line, right? Giving them information, tactics, ideas, strategies, and all kinds of things. All with the fear, all with the fear of not getting themselves into a situation where they are castrated. But ultimately, the castration was seen as a form of damnation, never a source of salvation, as the vasectomy is to us. To associate the atrocities of castration with one nation or one ethnicity or one culture or even a gender, right? Even if you wanted to say this was an activity of a specific time or a specific era, that would be impossible. Because the truth is, every culture, every nation, every ethnicity has had at one time or another practiced mass castration. If not on their own people, then other peoples that they subjugated. To a limited and justifiable extent, rather unjustifiable extent. Well, perhaps justifiable, right? Medically, it can be justifiable, right? So there's a limited and justifiable extent to this. Castrations are still practiced today, right? Although now it's done purely for medical reasons, nothing more than that, rather than the sadistic, malicious, vengeful, hateful intent of the long, distant, and almost lost and forgotten past, but not entirely. Not entirely. The hands of humanity are stained with the blood of the castrated throughout every culture. The atrocities extend to children. There are clearly recorded cases in some, I'm not going to say who, but in some cultures, ethnicities, nationalities, where children even as young as 8 or 9 years old would be castrated. Some would go as far as to have their the whole reproductive system removed and be left amputated. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the shame? This are the gory details that they sweep under the rug when they discuss the history of the vasectomy. They don't want you to know this. This is the real conspiracy theory. Castrations that led up to us finally discovering the miracle of a vasectomy. Other cases, and very, very popular cases, are those of the knee benders, the lovers of the counterparts and the cheating wife, who would have an affair behind her husband's back, a rich, powerful, influential, law-abiding individual. And they would have castration be the knee bender's punishment, to not just diminish his desires, his performance, but also his stature in society for eternity. This was the consequence in some parts of the world for infidelity. It wasn't just elimination and neutralization. It was a fate far worse than that. Then there are those cases of the prisoners of war who were castrated by having their reproductive system attached to a spinning wheel that just doesn't stop and stretches you until you slowly detach, right? Tearing you apart, or even worse, a raging horse that they would whip, and the horse would go speeding down an open runway, just an open runway, and they would just whip that horse and whip that horse, and that horse would run as fast as it can until snap, it would achieve castration. The horse wouldn't stop, it would keep going with follow through, dragging you or parts of you along with it. In some cases, they would have you tied down, and it would detach not just, the reproductive system, but bones, break bones, rip apart arms, that kind of thing. A terrible way to meet your demise, but a very popular one, right? The wheel, they would just turn it and turn it and turn it as slowly as or as fast as they could. Imagine just slowly being detached from yourself until, all day, all night, as long as they wanted, and they would just keep you right there in suffering until they would remove it. As a tool of war, the mutilated genitals of defeated enemies were taken as the spoils of wars and the rewards of the victors, while the defeated enemy would be taken into slavery and indentured servitude for the remainder of their natural lives. There are cases where some of these young men, the younger men, I won't say at what ages, would be used for the intimate pleasures of the slave master, right? So not only would they prevent you from being intimate yourself by removing your desires, they would then use you for their own intimacy to gratify their own intimate desires. Others were sold into solicitation, and they would do the similar thing for the profits of others, right? The shame, the shame was endless, and it would continue for an eternity and for life. Castration was a huge business, right? For those who, as they say, had the balls, right? To be a person or a castrator wasn't something that one would do merely for pleasure, although I'm sure there was some, right? The pleasure of torture. But a castrator was a professional, right? They were trained, they were experienced, they were qualified. They wouldn't let you just do castrations, right? Unless you knew how to do them properly, right? So in truth, to perform, they would be able to perform different types of castrations with different levels of damage and different effects and different outcomes. So depending on their purpose for you, they would either be cautious, right? And just remove what they needed to remove, and then sell you off so that you can perform whatever function they deem necessary for you. And then there were cases where they would just rip you apart, for maximum effect, to get as much gore and blood and whatever else as they wanted, right? They could make a whole show out of it. Really, they could, because they had training and experience. They had tools, they had the means, they had all the resources, they had assistant, they had a full staff. that could prepare and get you ready and place you in a particular way to have the desired effect. And after enough time, they would get quite proficient at it, right? But in truth, castrators were nothing more than glorified butchers compared to the sophisticated, advanced surgeons, urologists, specialists that we have now. You know, castrators were just people who were there. They were nothing more than meat cleavers. Really, nothing more than meat cleavers. Over generations and generations, millions upon millions of men, I mean, through thousands of years of humanity, either met their demise or were forced to live a life of shame, of obscurity, of indignity because of the devious, dubious, and surreptitious acts of unremorseful castrators. The road to the first and safe and effective and reliable and trustworthy vasectomy that we talk about today. The path to that was built on the mutilated, violently dislocated blood, gore, and reproductive gonads and the haunting screams of those that were violently and brutally and permanently disfigured through castration. This, this is the sad, vicious truth of our past, of the way that led to the first vasectomy. And as we read today's edification, I'd like you to meditate on just how far we truly have come and how truly blessed we are to have the advances that we have, and how you should really, really think about taking advantage of the vasectomy. So there it is, today's article, The Complicated History of the Vasectomy. I try to keep as much information from the original post that I can, just to accommodate the pictures of those who paved the way. I thought it would be useful to have their faces put in front of us, but the cost of that was then having to move the referencing and the credit to the side to accommodate more space. I really couldn't squeeze it in at the top. However, we can accredit Dr. David R. Paoloni, that's a Paoloni, Dr. Paoloni, David R. Paoloni. He is the associate professor of the Department of Urology from the University of Wisconsin in the Department of Medicine and Public Health. The article itself does not come from the university. So Dr. Paoloni wrote it and published it in Urologic History Museum. And if you squint enough, you'll probably be able to see the link to the actual article. But do not be concerned. We will read it here together right now. Dr. Paoloni wrote rather, the United States Supreme Court decision earlier this year. I don't believe that there was a date. I looked for a date. I don't see one, but yes, he mentions which year it is. The United States decision earlier this year has changed the reproductive and contraceptive landscape across the nation. Anecdotally, many urology practices have noted a substantial increase in the number of patients seeking vasectomy since the June 2022 court Supreme Court decision. So this was 2022. Decision was made by the Supreme Court. A recent study assessing the volume of Google searches for vasectomy showed that such searches peaked on June 25, 2022, corresponding to the highest search rate within the past 5 years. So I'm assuming that's since 2017, and a fourfold increase in the average rate throughout that time frame. Wow, that's tremendous. So the searches for Google, sorry, I beg your pardon, the searches on Google for vasectomy and the desire for the procedure went up 4 times and hit a 5 year peak just around the time when they were making the decision. He doesn't say what the decision is. I believe, if I'm correct, but I stand to be corrected. I believe part of that decision was to allow long-term storage of eggs and semen. You know, around that time they made the decision to allow storage from 10 years maximum, with the requirement of extending every 10 years to 50 years. So you can request a 50-year storage, and that was it. That's the only thing that comes to mind with regard to vasectomies around this time, June 25, 2022. But again, I stand to be corrected. But this is why we are studying the history, so we can get the information that we need. Given the renewed interest in vasectomy, a brief review of the history of the procedure is timely. I agree. A comprehensive review of the history of the vasectomy was published by Shenkin in your. This is Dr. Shenkin. Dr. Shenkin. I think I have a picture of him. Eugene. No, that's not him. I don't know who Shenkin is. Okay, I thought I had a picture of Dr. Shenkin, but I have somebody else. By Shenkin in Urologic Clinics of North America in 2009, and remains a definitive review of this topic. Yes, so this is the history that we are looking at. Completely no mention of the Dark Ages. Completely no mention of thousands of years, right, of savagery, right? Really, if you want to talk about a hidden history, a forgotten history, that right there, that is the hidden history of humanity, right? If you're wondering where the missing link in our evolution is as humanity, it was right there. It was right there in the castration ages, right? That is really, really where the missing link in evolution is. The pertinent highlights of this history from that chapter summarized below in this article cannot ignore some of the misguided beliefs regarding potential unfounded medical benefits thought to be associated with the procedure, nor the problematic association of vasectomy to eugenic movements of the early 20th century. Indeed, there were some unfounded claims about vasectomies and the power of vasectomies and how magnificent it is. Some of those things are proving true, but in different ways. But there are some claims that people made about vasectomies that we'll read about that are truly just mind-blowing and provably untrue. However, vasectomy has overcome this history to become a safe and effective form of permanent birth control for men. I think vasectomites have overcome a lot. I think vasectomites have overcome a lot, and it's really understated. How far we've come and how dark the path was. The first reported vasectomy was performed on a dog in 1823 by Sir Astley Cooper. Right, so this is where they start the history. 203, 202 years ago. They ignore thousands of history and go straight to saying, well, this is where we are now. We are doing vasectomies. Forget everything else that you should know, right? And as the generations go by, this information remains locked and hidden. Sir Astley Cooper found that this did not result in atrophy, in other words, the dying out and the uselessness of the gonads, as occurred with occlusion of the testicular artery. This is very scientific stuff, and I'm not even going to pretend to understand it. Castration has been recognized as a method of improving symptoms from benign prostatic benign prostatic hypertrophy, BPH, in the 19th century. And the first vasectomies performed in humans were also done with the goal of improving voiding. Felix Guyon made reference to vasectomy as an alternative to castration for inducing prostate atrophy in 1885, and Carl Gustav Carl Gustav Lanander, I want to get these names right, in Sweden similarly suggested that vasectomy could be an alternative to castration. So ultimately, castration, the ideas, the beliefs, the notions, the hypothesis, the philosophies behind castration as an effective form of contraception were only proven, at least the idea. The idea came about only in the 19th century, in 1885. In 1885, we're talking about after thousands upon thousands of years. And only then they said, well, around 1885, oh, maybe we don't really need that. Maybe we have another way. Maybe a vasectomy might be the effective thing that we want and won't ruin your life. Unlike castration, which will absolutely, ruin you. Reginald Harrison reported in 1900 on over 100 vasectomies done for the purpose of addressing PBH symptoms. So, 100 vasectomies done to address that issue without castration, right? So, PBH, which is benign prostatic hypertrophy, as written at the top there, was a reason to remove the testicles, the gonads, as they called them, right? And it was only later that I believe they found a solution around this. And Reginald Harrison reported that he had done over 100 vasectomies to address BPH, there you go, right? The effects of vasectomies on avoiding symptoms were unsurprisingly disappointing, and the procedure fell out of favor as a treatment for BPH, so that didn't work. With the development of new surgical treatments for prostate enlargement, bilateral vasectomy at the time of such intervention to prevent, I'm just going to try pronounce this, epididymitis. Oh, that's the first time I heard that. I'm going to try it again. Epididymitis. Yeah, I'm not going to do that again. EP did become commonplace until improved surgical techniques were more effective. Antibiotics made this unnecessary. So I'm not even sure what half of that stuff means, right? Very medical, very historically accurate, I believe, but also very medically sound. And unless you know what all these procedures are, you have some type of medical background, this isn't going to mean very much to you. But I do know that in the medical industry, especially urology, this stuff means a lot. And for us vasectomites, it means everything. So even though we don't really understand it, I, for one, appreciate the knowledge and the information and the update to my synapses of words that, quite frankly, I don't think I will ever read again. But if I do, I think I'll probably do better the next time than what I did right now. And of course, before I continue, the previous page had a picture of Sir Astley Cooper. Astley, that's not a very common name, right? And there's a picture of him right there, which is really why I have it in this way to accommodate the picture of Astley Cooper, as well as Eugene Steinach, Eugene Steinach. I hope I pronounced that right. And Dr. Harry Sharp. I believe it's Dr. Eugene Steinach. It is Dr. Cooper, or Sir. It's Sir Cooper, and of course we have Dr. Harry Sharp to credit for their contributions to a vasectomy. Continuing with the edification, it said, another unfounded purported medical benefit for vasectomy promoted in the early 20th century was the the return of youthful vigor and or rejuvenation. The return of youthful vigor and rejuvenation. So what they're saying is that effectively it improved your intimacy drive and your intimacy performance. I can see some truth to this for myself. Now this was debunked and discredited, but I can say that I saw some truth of this in myself. I can say that not being knowing that you do not have the capacity to inseminate a counterpart ultimately means that you are being intimate with people whom you find attractive and want to be intimate with. That in itself is going to improve youthful vigor and rejuvenate you, being with the people that you want to be with, rather than the people that you think you match with, or that you think you'll be compatible with, or that you think you'll be able to benefit something from, right? So, you could be rejuvenated. Of course, at the same time, you could have an existential crisis and have no desire for intimacy at all. It could go either way, to be honest with you. It could really go either way. That's why. And the same person could feel inspired and demotivated not too long apart from each other. Eugene Steiner was the most prominent promoter of this concept and popularized vasectomy for this purpose. Okay, so, he sold people a story. But effectively, all it did was change your ability to have children. It didn't really, give you like a rejuvenated purpose or anything like that. Vasectomy was performed on thousands of men with the express goal of reversing the effects of aging, including some famous men such as W.B. Yeats and Sigmund Freud. And this was the problem right here, right? Youthful vigor and rejuvenation. So people thought, if I do this, it will decrease the rate at which I age, or it'll stop me from aging altogether. This is very egotistical. Of course, it's not true, but it's very egotistical. I do understand the inclination that after you have a vasectomy, you want to extend your life as possible. You want to stay as healthy, as youthful, as rejuvenated as you possibly can, right? So I can see why people might say, oh, there's a new benefit in you after you got a vasectomy. You're working out more, you're eating healthier, you're taking care of yourself. But Yeats and Freud thought something completely different. I'm absolutely sure that Dr. Sigmund Freud was really in it for egotistical reasons, as was Yeats, who was an aging star in his time and was watching his years slip away from him, right? And I believe that Yeats was also a bachelor, so I can understand that instinct. Continuing, it says, unsurprisingly, vasectomy fell out of favor for rejuvenation when scientific data failed to confirm its effect to be anything other than placebo. So, yes, like again, I say I felt it within myself. Perhaps it was a placebo, perhaps not, right? But I was aware that I wasn't rejuvenated, but I also felt relieved. And that relief gave me motivation to go with more vigor, to go further than I'd ever gone before, right? And that can be interesting, it can be exciting, it can be rejuvenating, as they say. But ultimately, it's not gonna make you age less. You might think that you're younger, you might feel younger, but nope, no, you're not getting any younger, right? So after a while, people realize that no, this isn't true. And they moved away. They just moved away and continued with their lives instead of just telling the truth, and motivating for the benefits that are true, like not being able to have children, right? They wanted to say things, and also because it didn't prevent STIs, right? So they didn't have that going for them. So they just went with the the youthful vigor and rejuvenation, and you have more steam in your engine and whatnot. And even that didn't work out. That's why I just stick to the facts. I try to stick as close to the facts as possible, because the facts are on our side. Really, the facts are on our side. And all you have to say is, look, you get a vasectomy, you can't have children anymore. How much is that worth to you? I would say that's worth more than youthful vigor and rejuvenation. For especially somebody who's just spent 20 years paying bills. The idea that you don't stand the chance to start all that again, because when you have a new child, you don't continue from where you left off. You start again from zero, right? So if you don't want to do that, if you can see that this isn't really something that you're interested in, I might think of getting a vasectomy if I was you, right? It says here, and the discovery of testosterone and its potential benefits offered a more likely target in this area. I'm not sure how the discovery of testosterone would have helped, but I assume, just based on my limited understanding, the fact that castration decreased or removed really the fundamental producer of testosterone, and decreased libido, as they say, desire and performance, right? I can see how that could be concerning. But knowing that the vasectomy doesn't increase or decrease or change in any way whatsoever, not in any single way, the amount of testosterone that you have inside of you, I think that is a great advantage, right? But I don't see how you could use that for marketing. Why would you want to sell testosterone when every man has it? I was going to say most men, but in truth, every man has testosterone, right? And they have a lot of it. So, why sell something to people that they, quite frankly, they already have? It says the role of vasectomy in limiting reproduction by certain segments of the population remains an extremely problematic element in the history of this surgical procedure. Indeed, there were cases known of like forced vasectomies and that kind of situation. This is over and above just criminality, or the desire for no reproduction, right? You can't really force people to get a vasectomy, and when they were forced, it was very scandalous. It was very scandalous, population control, that kind of thing. A.J. Oshner in Chicago reported on the first vasectomies in the United States in 1897, and he suggested a role for sterilizing habitual criminals and chronic um, inebriates. I don't think I can say that word. Incompetence, people who cannot control their intimacy, and paupers, so people with no real income or form of earning income, right? So I'm not going to read that listing in. So, effectively what he said was there are certain, how you would describe, undesirable entities within society. And what he thought would be an idea was to sterilize them with a vasectomy. Now, I don't know what a good idea that is, right? Do you really want these type of people walking around being able to be intimate with no consequences? Perhaps that is better than what the consequences would be. Maybe that's what he was going for. But I would just based on the small brief understanding that I have of vasectomies, I think that's a bad idea. I think that's a bad idea, especially if you can get undesirable entities to freeze their sperm and then proceed to wreak havoc. You could have a bigger problem on your hands than just getting them to bend the knee. That's why I think some of these guys are just better off just bending that knee, you know, than to end up being described in any number of these words. Harry Sharp, the chief physician at the Indiana State Reformatory, published on his experience performing vasectomies on inmates. And in 1907, the governor of Indiana signed a law authorizing the involuntary sterilization of criminals and others deemed undesirable to procreate, right? That's why I used that word, undesirable. I was like, how did that get into my head? Yeah, I saw it from there earlier on. So effectively, they legalized forced sterilization. Now that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. That's really why vasectomies have such a bad stigma among so many men. We really have a terrible past. We really have a terrible past. Vicious, bloody, mean, cruel. And then they wrote laws forcing men to do the procedure, highlighting the what they considered the negatives, right? In other words, the inability to procreate. Again, remember these are benders. So procreation is really what they stand for. That's what they're all about, right? Building that family to advance the greater human goal. So to them, the inability to procreate is a punishment, right? But for me and for many other vasectomites, it is salvation. It is truly salvation. So already there you can see that this is a controversial issue, right? It affects not just history, a sordid, terrible history, but also has legal ramifications, financial, social ramifications, and philosophical ones too. It continues to say involuntary eugenic sterilization in those with certain conditions or guilty of particular crimes spread throughout the United States in the first half of the 20th century, but had ceased by the 1960s. Right, so yes, there was a time where they believed that men who had perpetrated, I'm going to say, violent, intimate crimes against various members of society, including minors, that they should undergo the process of sterilization, right? To avoid various many things, right? Including procreating and creating another generation of what they deem here to be undesirable people to procreate with, right? So it had its moment, and then it died out because that didn't work either, right? Because now what's happening is those men have now the freedom and the power of the vasectomy. Now, what you've done is you've taken men who should be contained by bending the knee and hit with that child support, hit with those bills, and forced to fall in line and pay bills and raise kids and be responsible. Now you've given them unlimited freedom to do whatever they want. I think this really is really kind of like what they say, shooting yourself in the foot or cutting off your nose to spite your face. You just hurt yourself, and really you just gave your opponent every advantage that they could have ever dreamed of. And for our final slide, it says, it wasn't until after the Second World War that that vasectomy took on its modern role as a voluntary means of birth control and family planning. So it took all the way to around 1940, 1945, right? That was during the Second World War. And that, now it's considered a form of family planning because it's been through everything, and it is now successful and, quite frankly, harmless to the person who receives it. Whereas before, it was pretty much a death sentence or an extreme punishment. It was utilized first to a great degree in the developing world. India, in particular, enthusiastically embraced vasectomy as a means of population control beginning in 1954. And the number of men receiving vasectomies in the mid 1970s increased by millions, often aided by incentives and recruitment. So, yeah, I think they were having a population and economic problem at the time. So, they decided to promote vasectomies and recruit people, paying them and saying, we'll pay you. Not only will we give you the vasectomy for free, we'll pay you to have a vasectomy. And I don't know how successful that really was. Eventually, I think they just let that whole program grow. They let it go, and today they have the highest population in the world, right? Talk about a population boom, right? They have the highest population in the world today. This is India. In the United States, vasectomy began to be promoted for family planning in the 1950s, and in the mid 1960s, approximately 40,000 vasectomies were performed annually. By 2015, 527,476 vasectomies were estimated to have been completed that year in the United States. With the spike in interest in vasectomy since the Supreme Court decision earlier this year, it remains to be seen if unprecedented rates of vasectomy will occur this year or be sustained in the coming years. I believe that many more men will receive vasectomies. I do believe, though, that many of these men will have had children already. I don't think that we'll get a lot of men who freeze their sperm, then get a vasectomy, and then later try IVF, which is very expensive and no guarantees, right? But very expensive. So, yes, so the history grew, and it grew in popularity. Today, the United States has more vasectomies than anywhere in the world. it's hard to say that if you combine all the vasectomies around the world and compare them to the United States, how they would fare are very difficult to say, but we do know that America has a lot of vasectomies. I actually believe they have the majority, like over 50% of the world's vasectomies are performed in the United States. So we really need to give the vasectomites in the United States a lot of credit for not just leading the way, for promoting the vasectomy, and supporting it, promoting it, supporting it, having it done, protecting yourself and leading by example, right? Many men around the world can really, really follow America's example in this particular area. Other areas, not so much. But this area, I think the Americans have got the right idea. As Schenken's thorough review in urologic clinics has made clear, vasectomy has evolved over the past 2 centuries from a procedure done with goals very divergent from reproduction prevention to commonly performed and to a commonly performed and desired means of safe and effective permanent sterility. I should have just read it properly the first time. So this is the end of the article. So I do know that if you look deeper into this history, there is a lot of information in a lot of different parts. There were doctors in Asia who I forget his name right now. There were so many new names that I went through, and I forget this particular doctor. And I'll remember his name and I'll mention him when I do. But he was quite frankly accredited with having invented a new and better way of being able to do vasectomies. And so, a lot of people played a great and important role in the history of the vasectomy, bringing us to where we are now. But the worst parts of that are in the past. Right, you have to go back like thousands of years to find out what really happened. Right, his name is Doctor. Oh, forgive me for this mispronunciation. It's Doctor Shunquang, spelled Shunqiang Li, Shunquang Li. He is from China, and he developed the no scalpel vasectomy, right? So instead of making incisions, Dr. Lee used a very fine, specially designed instrument to gently stretch the skin and reach the vas deferens through a tiny opening, often less than 3 millimeters in size, right? This innovation significantly, I'm reading now, reduced bleeding, discomfort, and recovery time. And what happened is that Dr. says Li Shunquang, right? People came from all over the world to study his technique. And then, of course, I think he's worth mentioning. That's why I had to move. Sorry, I'm sure you heard me moving around. I had to move over to another screen to get Dr. Li Shunquang's information, because I thought he was worth mentioning. And the whole time that I'm doing the history, I have it in the back of my mind that I have to mention this very, very important doctor. Because we've mentioned people from Sweden, from the United States, from India, from all over the world. I think it's absolutely critical to know the role that China played in the evolution of the vasectomy. And Dr. Li Xingquang, he really played an important role. Like his discovery and invention and tools changed the whole game. I believe that the vasectomy that I had was the invention of Dr. Li Xingquang. So I personally have reason to not just be grateful to all the men who, went through thousands of years of castrations, millions of men who suffered and endured, and then the millions more who did the vasectomy before it was even newly improved, which is what we have from Dr. Li Shenhuang. And I know that having had his procedure and how smooth it was, I mean, every day I talk about how effortlessly wonderful the procedure was, and easy and quick, and quite frankly, comparatively speaking, how affordable it was. And I have these men to be grateful to and to thank for that. So when you go and decide to finally get a vasectomy, I hope that it means a little bit more to you, knowing the history, where it comes from, and quite frankly, the people who contributed, the historical figures, including Dr. Li Shenhuang, to whom we are also very, very grateful for, because they provided us the tools and the means for our liberation and the path to our salvation, instead of the fear of having to wallow forever in legal matrimony and the clutches of the dark dimension. However, this is the end of the video. Again, thank you for your time and your attention. As usual, I appreciate it, and I always will. So please go ahead and call your urologist and your fertility clinic, freeze your sperm, get a vasectomy. This is, as usual, the message for this platform and the reason for my being here. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm out here saving lives, right? One vasectomy at a time. So this is the history, the true history. I think it combines some very helpful academic information with some information that I think you will know to be true only just by researching it, and it brings together two, quite frankly, meaningful worlds that have been deliberately kept apart. But I am the Ancient One, I am the Bachelor Supreme, and again, as you appreciate this information and meditate on it, again, please go get a vasectomy. Don't take any chances. Freeze your sperm, get a vasectomy. We've come a long way, and we have really achieved a lot, and we are at the verge of not just tremendous success, but a tremendous evolutionary movement in mankind. And as I say good day, I hope that you have yourself a very good day.